Hello, friends. Today I want to talk about shame. Shame is one of those feelings that we do not like to feel in our body. In fact, it's what usually drives people to addictions because they want to take that drink to not feel that shame, or they want to overeat the food, or go on a shopping spree. Whatever the addiction is, it could even just be work. They want to do something to not feel shame. And the reason, like I said, is because shame does not feel good in the body. If you're wondering if you have a shame wound or if you ever had or battled shame, you can ask yourself questions like, do I or did I ever feel like I'm not enough or I'm unworthy or I'm bad, I'm defective, there's something wrong with me? All of those are beliefs that are associated with the emotion of shame. And today I want to talk about how, if you've been in narcissistic relationships, how their narcissistic injury can cause you to have a template, a relationship template drenched in shame. And the reason I want to talk about this is because, first of all, for the sake of my dogs always have to play when I'm recording. Okay, so the reason I want to talk about this is because if anyone has shame as a victim of narcissistic abuse or childhood trauma, then it's really hard to be happy because shame becomes hate turned inward. And it's really hard to enjoy life when you are hating and loathing yourself, even if you're doing it on an unconscious level. It also makes it hard to have relationships, right? Because you don't, when you have that shame wound, it's almost like there's something missing inside of you. You don't feel whole. And so you can tend to go into relationships feeling like half a person, needing that other half of a person to be whole. But two half people are usually two people that wind up not having a healthy relationship because they're so enmeshed as if they are one, when a healthy relationship is about one whole person and another whole person coming together. Okay, so shame gets in the way of so much. In fact, it's the root cause of so many of the symptoms we get stuck in managing. For example, just to mention a few, underneath social anxiety, underneath people pleasing, inability to have boundaries, procrastination, just to mention a few things that we tend to try to work through, underneath them is usually shame. So if we can get it at the root cause, then it can take care of so many of the things we struggle with as we're trying to just live our best life. So that being said, let's dive in. For those that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a life and relationship coach. I specialize in helping people overcome narcissistic abuse, as well as complex PTSD and childhood trauma. I'm also the founder of the Thriver School of Transformation, which is a monthly membership where we meet live on Zoom every week and we work through the side effects of these things together. There are 9 to 12 meetings a month, from cognitive learning to somatic modalities that we do, and the cost for the month is $79.99. Now, currently doors are closed, but they will open in February for 5 days from the 1st to the 5th. So if you want to join our international community, make sure you're watching my videos for the first week in February. Okay, so let's talk about how a narcissistic injury creates shame in you. Okay, so just to understand it, and this is a hard part to swallow, I get it, okay, but the narcissist, as well as victims of narcissistic abuse, were both at one time children that were narcissistically abused. Okay, 9 times out of 10, both somebody battling complex PTSD or codependency and somebody battling NPD. Well, they don't usually battle it. They adopt it and think it's great, but they are both victims of narcissistic abuse. So what happens in what we'll talk about, the child that is predisposed and becomes the narcissist. And if you just bear with me, you'll understand how this leads to narcissistic injury. and in turn to shame that's put into you. Okay, so when that child is undergoing narcissistic abuse, it is too much for the child to handle. A child's brain cannot work through intense emotions like shame on its own. Like the child only has its emotional brain at that point. It doesn't have its logical mind online yet. So it's dealing only with its emotional brain, and it's being inflicted with a tremendous amount of shame. Well, the brain, when that happens, as a coping skill, will short circuit, so to speak. What I mean by that, you think of a lot of things plugged into a socket, an electrical socket, right? It will short circuit the breaker. And something similar happens with the brain. It's too much for the child. It's too much overload. It short circuits. And then what it does is it takes the memory of what's happening in the moment, as well as all of the emotions that are associated with this memory, shame being its primary one, and it kind of isolates that memory and those emotions in the limbic network. So it doesn't store the memory the way it stores regular memories. For example, we can think of something that we did in childhood, riding a bike. And that memory can be associated with people and many different times in your life when you were riding that bike. There's information added to the memory. There's connections with people, with places, with other feelings and emotions. Well, the brain doesn't store trauma memories like that. It literally disconnects it from all neural pathways, transports it into or I should say compartmentalizes it into the limbic network where no other information can be connected to it. It's just there in the limbic network. Your conscious mind doesn't see it anymore. But just because it doesn't see it doesn't mean that it's out of sight, out of mind, and not affecting you. So when it comes to the narcissist, that shame that is embedded in their limbic network is a story in their nervous system, right? Because if it was compartmentalized there, it was never processed and released. They never worked through it. So the nervous system, the way it works for us is the same way it works for the narcissist. It is always vigilant and on the lookout for anything similar to what is compartmentalized there. And so what happens is the narcissist can get that narcissistic injury, which means they are at that moment coming face to face with the emotions that are stored in their limbic network, which is the shame, self-hate, disgust, low self-esteem, rejection, abandonment. All those emotions, they come face to face with it when someone either intentionally or accidentally causes a narcissistic injury. Okay, so how do we do this intentionally? Well, if you're in a relationship, a romantic relationship with someone, and you don't know they're high on the scale, right? And you don't know anything about NPD. I know at one time in my life, I feel I was in a relationship with somebody that was high on the scale. But the truth is at the time when I started that relationship, if you had asked me, Michele, what do you know about narcissists? I would be like, oh, those are the people that love themselves. You know, they're so into themselves. They're always looking at themselves. That was the extent of my knowledge. I had no idea what malignant narcissism was and all the ways it shows up in relationships. So in those kinds of relationships, obviously there are times in any relationship, actually, when somebody's going to call you out for doing something that they don't like. That's normal. Okay. Nobody is perfect. And so we might say things, or we might do things, or we may not do things that we should. And if we're in a relationship, somebody's going to say, hey, you know, didn't really like the way you said that, or, you know, how come you never this, or, you know, I'm curious as to why this. It's a normal part of relationships. But for a malignant narcissist, what that does is it wakes up the story in their nervous system that they are bad, defective, unworthy. And so this is where it's almost like this is where there's like a shame transplant that takes place. The shame that is getting woken up in them, even if you're not trying to wake it up, even if you're just acting as a healthy person in this relationship, that shame will become or will get flung at you in a very harsh, and it feels like an emotional assault when that happens. So for example, if that person, you call out their behavior, they will fling at you what a horrible person you are, that you are so negative. All you do is look for the bad in people. All you do is cause problems. You love drama. And it's flung with such an intensity, combined with accusations that are false, right? That it can be really confusing. And if you don't understand that, honestly, that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with the story in their nervous system, you start thinking, what did I do? Do I really love drama? Do I like to fight? Do I always look bad at people? And you start trying harder to not do that. And on a subconscious level, the narcissist is training you to carry their shame and to work really, really hard, almost overwork to the point of exhaustion, to never let them feel their own shame. That's a tremendous weight placed on a person, to work to not have somebody else feel their shame. It's why people get stuck in that hamster wheel of overworking and trying harder and harder, because somewhere along the line, they thought it was their fault that that person was feeling that shame. And they started to try to get that person to not feel it. When the reality is the only way that person can not feel that shame anymore is if they do their own inner work to remove the story from their nervous system. Now, sadly, narcissists don't tend to do that. And I'm not here to try to encourage any narcissist to do that, because they probably aren't watching my videos except to criticize them anyway. My point is a couple of things. For you to first realize that if that has happened to you, you have to start putting the blame where it belongs, in the sense that all that shame, that it's your fault, you're bad, you're defective. You have to realize that that was a false story. That's the narcissist story about how they see themselves. And their way of dealing with their emotions is to project them and fling them onto you. If you carry that story in your life, it's going to limit you from being happy. It's going to limit you from being in healthy relationships. It's going to limit you in just feeling good about yourself. Okay, so understanding what they're doing, their narcissistic injury is their injury. You're not causing it. It's not your fault. Okay, that's something that they're going through because they have a story in their nervous system that, because of trauma, is in their limbic network, and they are choosing to not do the inner work to heal it. You can't heal it. You can't help them work through it, because what will happen is they will simply make you responsible for it. And then it becomes a story in your nervous system that I am bad, I am defective, there is something wrong with me. And narcissists can do this shame transfer when they have narcissistic injury, even when you're not trying to point out anything, even if you're just being normal little everyday things. Sometimes those things can frustrate or ignite, I should say, a narcissistic injury. For example, I remember being with a group of friends. One day we were out having so much fun. I was dating someone at that time. And afterwards, he just started going off on me because of how much fun I was having. Like, it made no sense. Like, okay, that's bad. And I just remember like looking at this person like, you're mad at that? Like, it didn't make any sense. And of course, again, because I didn't understand narcissistic abuse, and this is the danger. When you don't understand it, we tend to, and when I say we, I mean people that are empathic, empaths, people that can tend to be overly focused on pleasing and making others happy. We tend to, instead of looking at that bad behavior they're doing, we can be like, what did I do? How can I be better? And then that piece of you can get exploited by somebody that's toxic. Okay, so my main point I'm hoping in this video is that you start to realize that a lot of the shame that's in you, whether it's from a narcissistic parent or a significant other long-term relationship, a lot of that shame really wasn't yours. It was put in you because someone else chose to not carry it. They chose to not work through it, and so they deposited it in you. And that's unfair. And it really sucks when that happens. I totally, completely, 100% agree that that is just not fair. But the reality is that once it's there, now we have a responsibility of removing it from our nervous system. If we don't remove the shame wound that's in our nervous system, it's going to continue to make us unhappy, to deprive us from things that are good, and we can run the risk of passing that down to our children. Now, maybe a narcissist does that in an abusive way, but somebody that's been hurt by a narcissist and has a shame wound can do that unintentionally because they feel shame in themselves. And when we feel shame, it shows up in our life. Maybe because of the shame wound, because of shame, you put yourself last on your own list of priorities. You make everything about everyone else and nothing about you. You give, and you never expect anything. In fact, sometimes when somebody tries to give you, you don't let them. And when we have those behaviors that are from shame, children are sponges. We can tell them, have boundaries, but if we don't have boundaries, they're going to do what we do, not what we say. If we tell them, you don't have to have shame, you can love and accept yourself unconditionally. If we don't love and accept ourselves unconditionally, that's what they'll learn as well. So we have to work through it. And I'm going to give you 2 tips to do that today, to work through shame. The first one is to just start calling it out. In other words, instead of avoiding it and trying to do things to not feel it, right? Whenever we're trying to do things and we're so focused on what we have to do, we're really trying to not feel. That's why there's such an emphasis on, I need to do something. Well, if we're like, okay, I'm not going to do, I'm going to focus on feeling, look for shame, look for it and call it out just by saying, oh, there's shame. Name it to tame it. Okay, I'm feeling shame, and that's okay. The more you do that, the more you start to be comfortable with it. When we avoid something, we give it more power. When we accept it, it kind of takes a little bit of its intensity away. And when we can start to feel a little bit more comfortable with shame in our body, it becomes easier to be able to do that. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is a little bit more challenging. I know when I was told to do this, I had total resistance. I was like, no. So tip number 2 is to love and accept the shame. Now, when I was told that, I was like, why would I do that? Like, why? I don't want it there. I don't want to love it. But the thing is, the more I felt that way and the more I rejected it, the stronger it was. When I began to love and accept it, it dissipated little by little till one day I was like, when was the last time I felt shame? Okay, so just to understand that a little bit, and something that helped me to try it at least, is you have to understand that if you had narcissistic parents, or even if you were in a long-term relationship with somebody that was narcissistic and they shamed you a lot, remember the times when they shamed you? Do you remember how awful that felt? And isn't it true that when you were feeling that shame, that person that caused it emotionally abandoned you? They didn't give you any comfort. They didn't even validate your feelings. You were left to deal with the shame alone. And that was hard. So that's why the shame got stuck inside of you. and it becomes a story in your nervous system. When it comes up in the present, you have a choice. You can either treat yourself the way you were treated, and you can ignore your shame. You could reject it. You can criticize it and shame yourself for having it, which was what was done to you, which will only keep the story strong in your nervous system. Or you can say to that shame what you wish somebody had said to you. Maybe it's, you don't deserve that. I'm so sorry you're going through that. I see your pain and I care. Maybe it's that. I don't know. You'll have to ask yourself, what do I wish somebody said to me when I was younger or in the past when I felt shame? And when you say that to yourself, when you're feeling shame in the present, you are soothing the past pain. You are kind of lowering the interest on that shame. And that's how you clear it from your nervous system. So if anyone tries that, let me know how it goes in the comments below. And if you struggle to work through these things, if you struggle to apply the things that you're learning, make sure you check out the Thriver School of Transformation, because that's what we do together. And again, we reopen for 5 days only in the month of February 1st to the 5th. And we're going to take that month and we're going to really work on how our relationship is with ourselves. And shame is one of those things that gets in the way of our relationship with ourselves. So if you feel like you can benefit from the weekly assistance and the support of all of the international members that are there, make sure you come check us out. If not, start with those 2 tips that I mentioned here, and you can start working through your shame.